out of the loop. And then the other is a related conversation from folks who believed that because the Department of Commerce could, although it doesn't, intercede with respect to the IANA contract, hold ICANN accountable on other kinds of things, that this was the time to make a very big push on re-examination of ICANN's accountability. So we've had these two tracks, and proposals from along both tracks are in process. Well, actually, I should say, on the first track, the proposal has been ready for some time, and the proposal related to modifications and adjustments in our accountability has been underway. I'm looking right at Steve Del Bianco, who's been in the middle of all of this, particularly in accountability for some time. So that's the state of affairs. Many, many meetings, thousands of email messages, hundreds of telephonic phone calls. I have formal remarks on this later this week with statistics carefully accumulated, which are stale, I'm sure, from the moment that they were accumulated. And many, many, many pages of formal proposal and justification and discussion about all that. So that's where we stand. I won't take up more time on this. We have many of the, well, I should say it the other way. All of the people up here have been in pivotal positions, and most of the people in the room here, many of the people anyway, have also been in pivotal positions. So the three of you should feel free to ask any question you want, and the rest of us should just be quiet and responsive to you. So feel empowered, please do, and we're here for you. I don't know what the rest of us are doing here, but really, this session, if it's going to be maximally useful, is to answer your questions. Thank you.
Steve, thanks. And Joe, if I could turn it over to you. Thanks.
I guess the answer is everyone else is here to keep the people up here honest. So as was mentioned, there were two tracks, and one track is completed with a footnote, and I'll explain the footnote a little further on. But the first track was the concept that there are three essential operational communities which deal with the names, numbers, and protocols. And there was a desire to put together a proposal related to the transition of their activities. And that was what became the IANA Stewardship Transition Coordination Group, or the ICG, which apparently does not, we did not believe at the outset that we needed to capture all of the words in our title, in our acronym, so we are the ICG. The ICG was an interesting methodology of creation. In fact, it is multi-stakeholder in its very nature. It's representative of 13 communities. It was comprised of 30 individuals, and it was created as a result of this desire to have a proposal. The difference of the ICG is the ICG did not create, but rather assembled a proposal, because it was the three operational communities that were discussing what their transition methodologies were going to be. So the role of the ICG was to help organize the way in which those transition proposals were articulated so that they could be assembled into a combined proposal. So on the ICG's website, you can see the ICG's mandate, who the people were representing, the communities they were representing. By way of disclosure, I was a representative on behalf of the business community through my role as the chair of the Digital Economy Commission for the International Chamber of Commerce, and also a participant in the BASIS initiative, which the IGF is more familiar with. So all of the communities were participating and working together. The operational communities did a heroic job of, within a very short time period, pulling together proposals for the transitions, identifying the accountability mechanisms that they already had in their communities and how they would continue on through the transition. They went through a number of the issues. Each of those communities held an open and inclusive round of commentary in order to develop consensus and participation in their proposals. The proposals were finally submitted. The names proposal took a little bit longer because there was a little more complexity in their achieving consensus, and the footnote related to that is there is still an external dependency on some accountability issues that are being dealt with in the second part of the process. So while their proposal is complete as submitted, assuming all things come to pass, there is that needing for all things to come to pass. Once the 3 proposals were submitted, we then assembled them into a common proposal. The 3 proposals are actually left intact in the common proposal. There is a unifying section to the common proposal which kind of explains how the proposal works and how the elements work together. Part of the mandate of the ICG was to review the proposals, to see if there was potential conflict between the proposals, which had to be mitigated or otherwise resolved. One of the conflicts had to do with how IP was being held related to IANA, and that has been resolved as a path forward concept. And so we believed that the proposals as developed had actually met the requirements of our RFP, which included the NTIA requirements regarding the proposal. We then we set out the full proposal for public comment. We have some ICG members in the audience, so they'll correct me if my math is wrong, but I think we had at the end, we had 157, and I think there were 4 more, so I think we had somewhere in the nature of 161 comments, but it plus or minus 1 or 2 if I'm mistaking my memory. And those comments went through a range they raised a number of issues. The comments were overall supportive. There were issues that were raised. There were some comments that were not supportive. There is a summary document which has pie charts that break the comments down so that people can see kind of what the relative opinions were in the comments and the kinds of issues that were raised and how those issues have been dealt with. And so we've gotten to the point where we now have a proposal which we believe to be final, subject to the names proposal actually alerting to us that it is in fact correct and final in terms of some of the accountability provisions that they are waiting for the other accountability process to finalize in order for them to be able to clear on that, at which point the proposal will be ready for submission into the NTIA process, which would be through ICANN to the NTIA. But that is really how the ICG developed, and I cannot stress the word assemble enough, because it was not a drafting process from scratch for us. It was a process through which we assembled the proposals of the communities and then allowed them to be put forth in a way that made more logical sense. When you read the ICG proposal, it still looks a little bit like something that was patched together, because it was our mission not to change the community proposals, but rather to assemble them in a way that made sense. So the community proposals are as drafted. The unifying nature of those proposals comes through the fact that we had a request for proposal out that kind of asked certain questions to be answered, which gave some structure to the proposals. But that was the process. As I said, we're just about done. Obviously, if the NTIA has questions related to the proposal, then we would come back for that. We are also kind of maintaining a dormant status at the ready in case we need to be brought back in for other issues. But in light of the fact that I just should say I'm a little bit of a last-minute stand-in for a colleague who wasn't able to travel, who was doing these remarks. But I think if it's okay, since there are a couple of ICG members, I would just ask if anyone had anything to add that they wanted to highlight that I didn't hit in what were admittedly a little bit off-the-cuff comments.
Thanks very much. And for any of the ICG members who want to then raise anything, please, of course, do. Next, we're going to turn to Lisa Fuhrer, who was co-chair for the CWG stewardship, which was the part of the naming community proposal. I do notice, though, there's also in the audience members from the RIR community and also from the IETF community. In case you want to add any comments and observations from your side around all of this, please absolutely do. So, Lisa.
Thank you, Teresa. Yes, I come from the naming community, and the naming community, as soon as it was announced that the NTIA would hand over the stewardship of the IANA function, we decided to establish a cross-community working group, the CWG, IANA Stewardship Transition Working Group. And the naming communities are the GTLDs, the generic, and the CCTLDs, the country code top-level domains. And I'm one of the two co-chairs. The other co-chair is Jonathan Robinson, who comes from the GNSO, the GTLD world. Well, the working group was established, and we had 19 members, but we also had 133 participants because we decided to have a very open working group, so everyone could join and participants were equal to the members. We've had a lot of calls and, of course, a lot of email exchange, and all this has been made public to everyone, which is very important for a group of this kind if you want to be truly cross-community and open. The IANA Stewardship transition proposal was actually signed off by the chartering organizations in Buenos Aires in June. And there is one but to this sign-off, and that is that we had made it conditional in relation to the accountability proposal, because we had some areas that were overlapping. So where you have things like how to be held accountable, we knew that the accountability group was working on this. So instead of doing double work, we decided to actually made our proposal dependent on the work that came out of the accountability group. So as I said jokingly to Leon, who's going to present for the accountability group, we're waiting for you guys. And we surely are, because we have set some conditions that we will sign off and say, well, they met our requirements. So we're waiting for the next proposal that's going to be sent out soon for public comment. And but we're really confident that they're met. We are in close cooperation all the time. As a working group, I think the CWG stewardship has been special because it's a cross-community working group. There hasn't been that many of these within the ICANN community. So I find this has been a massive test and an actual validation of how the cross-community working groups are doing and all the processes that actually underpins this work. We have had, during our processes, we've done a great amount of outreach. We have tried to reach all the CCTLD managers throughout the world. There's been established an email list in order to involve those. We have had the regional organizations do a lot of outreach too. And ICANN has also done a great job. And all our webinars has been done in multiple languages. So this process, even though it's been quite complex, because the IANA stewardship transition issue is complex, because it's a lot of technical issues, it's a lot of processes, and a lot of abbreviations for all. So it is a complex issue that's difficult to make easy to understand for the broader community. But I think there's been done a great effort to have this. And as I say, all the meetings were open for everyone to attend and participate in. And the material has been made public. And I've discussed this with Jonathan, because we think there's also been a lot of in-reach. Outreach is very important, but it's also very important to have the actual community working and having the information spread out. And we know, especially the GNSO world is very broad. You have the non-commercial you have the commercial, you have the registries or registrars. So this is a community that has a lot of different agendas, and they have been working hard to actually discuss and comment on the work within this stewardship transition. So furthermore, we have had, because we made this proposal conditional, we have had close collaboration with the accountability chairs. We've had weekly calls in order to try and find a way to not do double work. And as we have set requirements, it's important to align. Are they working in the direction that we thought was important for our proposal? So it has been even more cross-community working between the groups. Furthermore, we have also had, as Teresa said, there are 3 operational communities. We have the numbering, we have the naming, and we also have the protocol communities. And these 3 groups has also been working together in order to sort out things like the IPR of IANN and other issues. So for me, I find that this work with CWG has been good for the community. It's been good for the global internet society. I think we have spread out the knowledge to a further and wider audience. And even though this has not been perfect, I think this has been a very multi-stakeholder focused effort. And I think it's brought knowledge and understanding between the different stakeholders in the community, which I think is essential for the multi-stakeholder model as such. Thank you.
Oops, thank you, Lisa. So part of a multi-stakeholder model is also the role of governments. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Thomas Schneider in his capacity. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, actually, I would suggest that we let Leon go first, because then everybody gets the whole picture of the process, and I will comment on all aspects of it. So if it's fine for you, I'll let you go first, then you get all the processes together, and then I will comment.
That sounds perfect. Okay.
Thank you very much, Teresa. This is Leon Sanchez. Okay, so yeah, we're here. So as Lisa said, they're all waiting for us. So, how the accountability track came to life, actually, I was discussing with Steve Del Bianco while we were waiting to getting our accreditations today, and this was actually born a year ago when we were at Istanbul at the ICANN town hall meeting. The community raised concern on whether with the ending of the historical relationship between the U.S. government and ICANN as a contractor of the IANA functions, which would be the backstop that ICANN would actually have, and how ICANN would be held accountable to not only its inside community, as Lisa pointed out, but also to the larger internet community in ways that could, of course, address the different concerns from the communities. So a group was organized and chartered to look into these issues, and we formed a group with, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around 25 members from the different SOs and ACs. This is the supporting organizations and the advisory committees. And we also have many participants, and we are a community from all the stakeholders within not only ICANN, but outside ICANN. We have people that have been participating from outside the community, because we think that the more inclusive this exercise is, then the better that it will address everyone's needs and everyone's concerns. So we have had somewhere around 70 meetings so far, and we have more than 150 people participating in these meetings. We have held many face-to-face meetings too, and we have produced so far 2 proposals that have been published for public comment. We have received feedback from the community, and not only within ICANN, but as I said, also from outside ICANN. And we've been in touch and very closely coordinated with the CWG, with the ICG, and also other communities like the numbering communities and the protocols communities that have reached to us and have worked along with our group to try and build a better proposal for everyone and for to address everyone's needs. So one of the questions that arose also along with this track was how could we have not only ICANN accountable, but ICANN's community accountable to each other. So we've been looking at many ways to actually have not only ICANN as the organization accountable to its community and the larger internet community, but also having this community that conforms ICANN accountable to each other. So we are setting up a third proposal that will be published on November the 15th on a summarized version, and then we'll be publishing the third proposal on November the 30th. And to give you a very brief, high-level overview of how the group has thought that accountability can be reached, the group has come to think that accountability can be reached through empowering the community. So we have designed a proposal that vests a set of powers into the community that could be exercised and also that could be enforced at a certain point should any of these powers would be denied or would not be complied by ICANN's board. So I think that I would not like to go into details as to which powers are these, but I can tell you that these powers have been very thoroughly thought, very thoroughly detailed into how this could be exercised and enforced if there need be. And as Lisa highlighted, this has been a very inclusive and multi-stakeholder way exercise that has enabled everyone to actually raise their voice, raise their concerns, to be listened by the CCWG, and to collect this feedback, introduce it into the new proposals, and of course try to address everyone's needs. So hopefully we would be concluding our work later this same month. And after that, then we would be forwarding this third proposal to the different chartering organizations for them to review the proposal, hopefully vote and support it. And after that happens, then we would be forwarding this proposal to the ICANN board, which in turn would actually forward this proposal to the NTIA. And then all the pieces in the puzzle would be together and complete. So we could actually begin the path toward concluding the transition. So I guess that's an update from the CCWG, Teresa.
Thanks, and I know that many of the CCWG members who are here are also having informal conversations and on the list working hard to get everything ready for the 15th publication and then for the 30th publication. So thanks to everybody on that. Thomas, I'll turn it over to you next, and then Gonzalo. Thank you.
Thank you. As you have said, my name is Thomas. I work for the Swiss government. It's actually become my night job because ICANN has become my day job, and sometimes it switches. And but it's intense, but it's interesting. Because we've heard very positive statements so far. Of course, I'll be very critical because you need to have a certain balance here also on the panel, of course. I won't speak on behalf of the GAC because this is only when I refer to consensus positions and what are. And the first one is that actually all GAC members have welcomed this process as an important process with a hopefully good outcome, as an important step in the development of the internet governance ecosystem. And I will make, like, since accountability is the key of this year, we'll make two. I will look at the accountability of the process itself and then the accountability of the potential outcome. First of all, I think accountability, one of the preconditions, and normally they go together, is transparency. And I have to say that these processes have been extremely transparent, to the sense that every meeting, whether it's a physical meeting or a telephone conference, is recorded. It can be looked at, watched, mostly not watched, but read or looked at, listened to afterwards online. All the emails are collected, so really everything is there to be checked if somebody wants to check something, which is I think a very good signal. And then, of course, another element on accountability is actually inclusivity, and representativity is maybe not the ideal word, but something in that direction, that everybody should be at the table. And it is, again, remarkable, I think, that the process has been absolutely open for everybody in the world that is interested to participate. Of course, there are some members of these groups that have a so-called voting right, but that hasn't really been applied. So it's similar to the UN commission that is dealing with the WSIS follow-up, where you have the formal members and then you have participants who are actually in the discussion equally involved and listen to, like, the former members. So you also hear the participants. There's no distinction made in the discussion, in the work, between participants, where everybody can be a participant, and the former members. I think this is a very good way to work. So on paper, this process is uniquely open also compared to others. Of course, then in reality, it gets more difficult to keep up inclusivity and representativity in quote unquote, for resource reasons, and the process has been very intense with a very strict timeline. I will not go into the reasons for this, but with the effect that some people have spent up to 10 hours per day for months working on this process. And if you have a day job or a night job where you need to deliver other things that you can't, and if you happen to have a family in addition to your day or night job, and so on, this has been a challenge for many people, in particular also for governments. They can't just hire 2 more people because the new process is up. So that in the end, of course, those who shape things in the core is in the end a very limited number, which is problematic, but to some extent unavoidable. But that needs to be taken into account, and also ways maybe for future processes on how to try and enlarge that number of people. To say something positive again, what is useful and necessary is after the publication of every draft, there is a public comment period, which then actually gives a chance for people to catch up, to comment on what there is, and then if these comments are taken into account, so that actually helps to bring the views of those in who haven't been able to follow and shape the whole work on text and documents as closely as others. So there are several elements built in that help to account for some inclusivity, I think, which is necessary. So we are also, as governments, we are part of these works. We try to follow, we try to feed in. I think we've done a remarkable progress compared to how we used to work before in feeding in such a process where you normally don't have time to consult with all your ministerial and federal offices in your capital because there's simply no time. And we nevertheless have managed to get individual input from governments, but also get a number of consensus inputs from the whole GAC into this process, which has not been easy, but and we will try to continue to do that. I think it is also worth looking at the process and seeing this as something new. Also for us governments to work under these conditions is not something that we are doing in intergovernmental organizations where you have way more time and like well-established processes. This is a new process. It's an interesting process. And this is something that we should also see as a modality to work for the future and have a look on how to develop this further. Then with regard to the substance, I think I won't go into the technical aspects of the CWG proposal, of the IANA proposal, but rather focus on the accountability discussion, which is of course fundamental for most of the governments, because for us the key behind this is how to make sure that ICANN is, as it commits itself to in the affirmation of commitments, how can we make sure that ICANN is acting in the global public interest? Of course, then the question is, what is the global public interest? How to define the global public interest? But I don't think it's the point to try and define a global public interest. It's to try and get a structure, get an inclusivity, transparency, accountability to make sure that all special interests that are relevant are somehow noted, and there's a process to balance these interests, that in the end the outcome is something that everybody can accept, that is taking care of all the interests. And if that is achieved, I think then we have achieved the ultimate goal of this process, at least in my view. And that goes along, of course, with introducing elements or strengthening elements that should reduce capture of ICANN, of the whole system, by governments, by special interest from whatever side, whatever private sides, so that, again, whatever comes out is something that is acceptable in the interest of possibly all of us. And you need transparent processes, you need inclusive processes, and there's some room for improvement in ICANN to try and make sure that not just the industrialized regions are present and well represented in all parts of ICANN, but also the developing cultures and regions and countries, all stakeholders, not just the governments, are represented. And then I think if this process helps to improve this as well, I think we can be proud of it. Thank you.
You certainly raised a lot of points for our discussion after Gonzalo speaks around the relevance also in lessons learned for the broader internet governance dialogues. Gonzalo, as a former board member and from the region, your observations on all of this.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. Well, it's good to close this panel, from at this point, because it's going to be so much easier for me to add some words, since I think you have a clear picture about what's going on with this process after hearing Lisa, Leon, Thomas, and Steve. So let me add some words in my experience as former board member and now independent observer about this process. It's quite obvious that this process, the transition and all the work related with the transition, is probably the most important effort that ICANN has took in the last years. So I think that you might agree with me that we are in this point where we are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. As you have heard, so far more than 90% or even more % of the work has been done. And now we have some pending issues, especially in the accountability side or in the accountability track. But overall, I think that this entire process has been a really important and interesting test about what is the multi-stakeholder system, because all the process has been conducted under that umbrella, and it's quite remarkable. So obviously, the inner nature of ICANN, combining so many different interests and even philosophies about what ICANN should be or internet governance should be, is complicated, but it's the nature of ICANN. It's the nature of the multi-stakeholder system. It's the nature of the things that we are doing here. And we have been proven, we have proved to be able to manage this process, and we are really, really close to an end. And that's quite something, and it's really important, all the efforts that the community and staff and board has put on this tremendous process. So finally, let me, I don't know, in a nutshell, the message that I want to convey here is that we are really close. Next to last mile we are in the next to last mile, because last mile is going to be implementation of the agreements that we are reaching here now. So for the last mile and and where we are now, don't forget that this is about the multi-stakeholder process. It's not just about ICANN. So sometimes we are so focused in our own issues and problems that we forget that this is part of an entire ecosystem. So the agreements that we are making here and the way we are moved in the future should be taken in account that the most important and relevant part of this is how the multi-stakeholder system works inside one of the most important, or one important element of this ecosystem. So with those words, I will, close my remarks and invite you to if you have questions or comments on this. Thank you.
And thank you very much, everybody. So I wanted to open up the floor for questions, either from the three who have not been following this closely or from anybody else. I know that we have remote participation as well, so if there's any questions from remote participants. And for those in the room, you actually need to come up to the microphone to ask a question. And sorry, it's a little bit of a trek to get up here.
I should have listened to Steve's advice to take seats in the first row at the beginning. So, Jānis Karkliņš, Ambassador of Latvia. I'll be asking question in my personal capacity. So, of course, I would have loved to hear the essence of the proposal that we're talking about. We're talking about processes. Processes are very important, of course, but for those who for one reason or another cannot follow the discussion, it would be useful to learn in very succinct way where we are and what's the substance of the proposal, how IANA transition will be carried forward. But my question is actually very simple. To my knowledge, there is accountability framework in an ICANN, and why this discussion about improved accountability couldn't have been conducted within existing framework set by affirmation of commitment, but the new process has been created. Is there any specific reason? I would like to understand why it was decided to do it in this way. Thank you.
Jānis, does anybody want to outline briefly what the operational community proposal looks like, and then respond to the accountability question? Yeah, Lise, and then Leon. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I can briefly say about the IANA stewardship transition proposal that today IANA is a part of ICANN. The new proposal is a legal separation of the IANA function from ICANN, but ICANN is still it still belongs to ICANN. We have formed a customer standing committee that is having the oversight of do they comply with the service level agreements or expectations that's been set. And there will be a review of the IANA functions every 5 years. So it will be evaluated along the way to see how this is working. So there's going to be a small post-transition IANA board that's merely that's a functional board, as small as possible, and then you'll have the legal separation. So it's supposed to work as today, but it's legally separated. And then you have some some groups that are taking over the oversight that NTIA was performing. Today, NTIA sign off every transaction's been done by IANA. This has been removed, but you will have like weekly assessments of how is the SLEs met by the IANA function. Thank you.
And then there's also elements of the IP addressing community and elements of the protocol parameter community that are built into that, which are focused on strengthening existing relationships around the existing IANA functions model. Leon, do you want to talk a little bit how we came into having an accountability process? Thanks.
Yes, Teresa, thank you. As I said, this track was born a year ago in Istanbul, and the reason for it to be worked out as part of the IANA transition is that the community felt that there were some gaps on accountability today, and there are some things that could be enhanced in the way that ICANN is, as an organization, accountable not only to its community, but to the wider community, as I said. So this group was chartered to actually looking into enhancing ICANN's accountability as an essential part of the transition, because the feeling from the community was that if the U.S. government relationship was going to end, and if we hadn't these pieces of the puzzle regarding accountability in place, so that if, let's say, for example, the board go rogue at some point, then who would actually stop them from going, for example, mission creep, or from just going against the interests of the community, or the advice from the advisory committees, etc. So the reason for this to happen along with the transition was because we as the community, and I'm of course saying my take on what the community thought at that point. I'm not speaking on behalf of the community, but my take is that the community felt that we needed to have this ability to keep the organization accountable to all stakeholders, and to prevent it from actually doing things that were not in the best interest of the community. So this is why this group was started, and this is why we started working on the different issues. Actually, we have two work streams. We have work stream 1, which are those requirements that need to be put in place or fairly committed before the transition happens. And we have work stream 2, which are those issues that can be, well, that actually need more time to be addressed. But as long as we guarantee that work stream 1 goes well, then we would actually guarantee that work stream 2 issues could be taken care of at a future stage, and then the whole process of enhancing ICANN's accountability could be completed. So this is why we, as the community, asked to have this group form, and to actually guarantee that accountability was to be enhanced before the U.S. government handed this stewardship over to the internet community. So I hope that answers your question, and of course I'm open to any other comments. Thomas?
And maybe to answer Yanni's part about why was this special procedure used, I think it's ICANN is generally working in silos. So those who make the policies work in their constituency. The governments work in a separate room, trying to find out what's going on, trying to give advice to the others. And more in the recent years, there have been things that it was felt that it should be cross-community, so we should break these silos and work together. And I think it's one of the first times that, for instance, the GAC has actually officially participated in one of these cross-community or cross-constituency working groups as a so-called chartering organizations. There were some discussions among governments whether we can actually do so, because that would mean that we would maybe have to vote in the end, or how would we participate as an advisory body in a decision, and so on and so forth. But since the the basic method of working, as I also said before, is actually based on consensus. So the whole so-called ICANN community is supposed to, in the end, consent to a proposal via the chartering organization. So that made it easier for us to actually participate. And so it's not a completely new thing. There are also a still growing number of cross-community working groups. And this is just probably the biggest ones, or the two biggest ones before the ICG is slightly special. And that I just wanted to say something about the importance of trust here. A lot of the debates on the accountability track was like, okay, maybe we trust the board because they're all nice people, but sometimes we don't, or we are not sure. So trust is a nice thing, but it's good to undermine, let's say, trust on persons with structures, with procedures that need to develop with an institution that is young, that has developed in importance and in size as well, and so on and so forth. So this is like a normal, to some extent, a normal institution building process where you fight about structures, that you have trust between the board, between the community, between the different elements of community. Sometimes when you represent the government, for some people you're already a danger because they don't really think that government should be part of this, and others don't trust others. So this is also a way to increase trust through solid procedures that fit to the challenges and the mandate of the institution. Thank you.
Steve had some comments, and then Gonzalo.
Thanks. So Giannis asked a very central question of after a decade and a half of structure with an awful lot of attention to accountability, why weren't the accountability measures that were built into ICANN sufficient or viewed as sufficient? So that's a sobering question, which has, I think, two very important elements to it. One is it became evident very quickly in the dialogue that there were many people in the community who felt that those elements were not sufficient, and elements of distrust, or if you peel back a little bit, that people were just unhappy with some of the decisions that were made and wanted to find some leverage for revisiting or preventing similar things in the future. Sitting on the board, of course, we take all of that very seriously, and rather than viewing it as an adversarial process, we took it to heart and have been doing a lot of introspection and consideration of do the mechanisms that we have work well enough, and if they don't, then they should be fixed, and how do we address the communication and shared understanding of the process with everybody. So although it's a bit messy and noisy and sometimes painful process, our overall view is that this is a fundamentally constructive and healthy process. And when we come out of it, and I don't know how long it's going to take, because the submission of the proposal is a very important milestone, but it is in fact just one milestone along the way. And even if one plots out the milestones for acceptance by the government and implementation of the bylaw changes and completion of the transition process, all of which we expect will be completed by within this period of time, ending I think in September. So a little less than a year. The reverberations of this are going to last considerably longer, and I think that the effects will be understood only over a period of time. I think there'll be some very healthy and constructive things. I think some of the particular specific hopes that individuals have may or may not be borne out. They may find that the mechanisms in place don't actually work the way that they had in mind, but this is the way it's always been. We built the network back in the late 60s and early 70s. A lot of us had very specific ideas about it. The whole thing has been a big success. Each individual piece has perhaps not been identical to what we had in mind, and we live in a kind of interesting real world.
Thank you. Well, as you may imagine, it's difficult to follow Crocker, to explain what the board was trying to say or thinking back on those moments. Now you have the vision from Leon, from the community, and Steve from the board. So basically, Janice, I think that the most simple, straightforward answer to your question is that because I think that the general in the community and the board and staff felt that this is a bottom-up process, and the community was raising points that perhaps, accountability measures that we had in place were not enough. So since we are rooted and we believe in that bottom-up approach in this multi-stakeholder model, we took it seriously, and 1 year after, again, we are just about to finish this process. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. The gentleman here, I think you had a question as well? Yes, please.
Thank you. It's not a question, it's a remark about the ICG proposal. The presentation of the ICG used the right name, the right word. They said, we assembled the 3 proposals. I don't think it is the good way to go, because their mission is not to assemble, their mission is to compile the proposals. Their mission was to come up with one single proposal based on the 3 proposals. Why I am saying that? It is because the 3 proposals have their own, each one have its own review process, its own customer service structure, etc. Suppose one day, if one of the communities decide, one of the review process, decide to make separation of the PTI, and the other parties of the community will not accept it. Don't you think that this may affect the stability and security of Internet? Thank you.
Tijani, if you could just also introduce yourself for the audience. We have the privilege of knowing you. But.
My name is Tijani Benjama.
So Tijani raises an important point. Does anybody on the panel or in the audience want to comment on that? No? Paul? Please, yeah? Please.
I agree. It's 3 proposals that needed to be compiled into one, but I think the ICG had a very important role in ensuring that they were not contradicting each other or made things impossible for each other. And I think as the point was that since they've been through each of their own process, it was important not to touch them unless it was absolutely necessary. And I think that's important, and that's why it went out for a second, or it had its own public comment period, the ICG proposal that was compiled. But I think, and I know from the naming community, we were very aware of our proposal not interfering with the other communities because we were the last one to finalize. We didn't meet the deadline as the other 2 communities did. And for us, it's been very important not to disturb the other proposals if we could avoid it. And I think we did, and we left it open for them if they wanted to be part of the structure that we propose in our proposal. Thank you.
Lisa's part of the ICG process, but I want to comment from the side. We were just looking at it. The ICG was not as passive as the suggestion, as the wording, just compiling the inputs suggests. They did an extremely insightful piece of work up front by setting the right conditions so that the proposals that would come in would in fact fit together and not need, ideally not need modifications. So the posture of assembling that was in light of a advertised strategy up front and laying the foundation for that. So I think that was a very helpful and constructive, non-passive part of the process.
Hi, it's Paul Wilson here from APNIC. I was one of the ICG members for the numbering community. I think it's very important to go back to the basis of the ICG process and proposal, which was the recognition of the three independent sets of IANA functions. And in fact, the independence of those functions is sort of fundamental to the background of the entire IANA process, which has seen those functions come together under one roof for good historical reasons, but not necessarily because they are, or not in fact because they are interlocked intimately. So the three sets of functions themselves absolutely need to operate in a sustainable, stable manner, and perhaps the integrity of the internet as a whole is more related to the individual integrity of those three particular functions. So in a case, I guess, where the PTI was separated out, then that is occurring for very good reasons relating, I'd say, mostly to the integrity and the decisions made in the naming community. The numbers and protocols communities have both agreed and are planning so far to contract with ICANN, so a separation of PTI would have some implications, but I think that's something that would be resolved in a fairly straightforward way at the time. And as I say, to recognise the need for integrity and the stability of the individual three functions themselves probably becomes paramount at that particular time. The coordination between the three sets of functions is still something that is that all the three communities have stressed very strongly to be an ongoing and indefinite priority as well. Thanks.
Hi, Alan Greenberg. I'm chair of ICANN's at-large advisory committee and an active participant of both of the groups. I've got a really pragmatic answer. It is conceivable that the things that Tijani worries about and that Paul said will probably be handled well anyway could happen. And in its wisdom, perhaps the ICG should have asked for all three groups to work together and come in with a single plan. It would never have met the deadline and probably several years out if it had done that. So I think it took a very reasonable, pragmatic approach to try to get something done.
Any other questions, either from remote participants or from the audience? We have one from remote coming in, and then I'll go to the gentleman. Sir? Sir, if you want to go first, because we're still waiting for the remote participant to come in. And just be sure to introduce yourself. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Pranish Prakash. I work with the Center for Internet and Society in India. And I had two questions. One was about something substantive that is contained in the ICG proposal, essentially, and a comment that was made about it. In a hearing before the U.S. Senate subcommittee, the head of the NTIA, which is part of the Department of Commerce in the US, said, frankly, if, and he was referring to shifting of ICANN or IANA jurisdiction, okay, if it were being proposed, I don't think such a proposal would satisfy our criteria, specifically the one that requires that security and stability be maintained. And I would note that in the CWG proposal, also in Annex S, there is a requirement that ICANN and the PTI be, the jurisdiction of the PTI, the new body that's being rolled out, be in the US. Now, I remember that 10 years ago, during WSIS, that was a matter of great contention. Is this something that everyone on this panel believes affects security and stability of the internet if jurisdiction were to be opened up? Two, and so essentially, do you agree with Larry Strickling on his comment? And two, one of the requirements, I'm reading out from para 6 of the Net Mundial initiative, where it says, that it's expected that the process of globalization of ICANN speeds up, leading to a truly international and global organization serving the public interest with clearly implementable and verifiable accountability and transparency mechanisms that satisfy requirements from both internal stakeholders and the global community. And it further emphasizes in other parts of the document that the process of IANA transition should happen with the participation of all stakeholders extending beyond the ICANN community. Now, we at the Center for Internet and Society have done a study, research on the participation on the ICG mailing list, CWG mailing list, and other important IANA transition-related mailing lists. And what we found was that this hasn't happened at all. Around 40% of all the participants across the different mailing lists, of 5 different mailing lists that we studied, were all from the US, from a single country. 2 out of 5 are from the US. And it moves up to 80% if one looks at Western Europe and others group in the UN regional grouping. So has the IANA transition process failed in this regard, the Net Mundial Declaration?
Thank you very much. Lisa, please.
I'll try and give it a go because we had a first proposal out, a first draft out, where we actually made a contract model. And we had a major pushback on this because people really wanted the IANA function to stay as it is today. So from our point of view, we didn't want to touch on the jurisdiction because that would change even more. So from the first public comment period, the answers from the community was, you're going too far in how you drafted this proposal. So we went back and did the legal separation in order to, if we have any concerns in the future, it's easier to separate the IANA function out. But we wanted to keep it as it is because there was great satisfaction with how the IANA function worked today. And we had mingled too much with this in the first draft. So for us, that was the reason why not to do anything regarding the jurisdiction, because that would be as a first draft.
So it's not related to security and stability of just to, my pointed question is, do you agree with Larry Strickling that stability and security of the internet would be affected if jurisdiction of IANA or ICANN were to be in question?
Do you want to go first, Steve? Okay, so the jurisdiction issue is something that we have come along, of course, during the work of the CCWG, and is something that we are going to address as part of Workstream 2. To your question, does it relate to the stability and resiliency of the internet? That is something that we cannot tell at this point. That is why we are taking more time to address this issue as part of the Workstream 2 plan that we're trying to carry out. So I couldn't tell if this directly relates to resilience and stability of the internet, but I can tell you that this is something that is of course important, and we are aware that is a concern from the community, and that is why we rather give it enough time to develop and to explore all the consequences that this may have, not only for ICANN, but for the larger community outside ICANN, as you have pointed. So that is why we're trying to address this as part of Workstream 2. It's not just trying to kick the can for a further point. We recognize that this is a very serious point, and that's why we want to address this in a very serious way too. Now, to your second question on whether we feel that we have failed the Net Mundial Declaration on the way that participation has been taking place in this effort. I wouldn't say that. I think that you cannot control what other people do. You can control what you do. You can call for participation. You can make the most efforts for everyone to actually join the conversation. You can have remote participation. You can have face-to-face meetings. You can have papers, proposals published, etc. And I mean, you can do all the efforts for others to actually join the discussion, but you cannot force them. So I think that the CCWG, the CWG, the ICG, the NTIA, ICANN have done all reasonable efforts in hands for others to join the conversation and to contribute to this larger discussion. But whether they have been, whether they have joined or not, I think that's something that goes far beyond what we can control. So I don't think we have failed in that. We have made all reasonable efforts for everyone to actually contribute to the discussion.
Thank you. Just to add that, well, on top of that, in different languages with translation services, trying to reach out in different forums. So I share what Leon is saying, but again, I hear what you're saying in terms of Net Mundial is one part, and then we should get involved with different communities. I said in my previous statement, which is true. But these are issues mostly related with ICANN, and ICANN is dealing with them. So, but what ICANN was doing during the last year, or 2 years, or 3 years, or five years, whatever, is to put the elements, the necessary elements to you for people elsewhere, you know, to participate in this process. And this very panel is one of the steps that ICANN is taking as a whole, not just the ICANN staff organization, but you have here, you know, people from the community talking about this process. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that the remarks you made are very pertinent and relevant, and it alludes to some of the issues that are raised. I really think that on paper it is unique. If you compare to other institutions, if they talk about their future, they probably won't ask everybody in the world to participate. But of course, de facto, there are barriers. And if you don't speak English, of course, you get like a draft proposal translated in your language, but you are not able to shape that proposal because you have no chance. So language is one barrier where more could be done. But of course, that takes resources, it slows down the process. And I mean, we all know how these things work. We are here, I don't know whether we have 6 languages in that room available, the UN languages or not, but we all talk in English. So there are like reality limits to this. But of course, I think we should not stop trying to improve. And if you compare ICANN where they are now to compare where they have been 10 years before, a lot of progress has been achieved, but we are still not there yet. I think this is obvious. And if you look at that's what I said, if you look at the participation, but not just in the CWG, also in other parts of the ICANN, there is an imbalance that has its historic origins, and that is the way history develops. But efforts should be taken by all to get that to a level that we can say, okay, it is improving, it keeps improving, and it will probably take some time. But I think, and I'm very strongly behind those who think that this is a key issue in terms of the legitimacy of the model, and as part of accountability, that all voices are heard, and not just the ones with resources. And I think we should continue to work for this. Thank you.
I was going to try to respond, but the responses here have been far more eloquent and comprehensive and covered everything that I had in mind. So I think I'll pass. I think it's an important point. We strive very hard to be inclusive. And there is a distinction, I think, that has to be made between the effort that's put into that versus the results. And one can always look to see if one can do better. But we don't always have complete control of the results.
We have a remote participant? Excellent. hear you, yes.
that were submitted. The words were selected carefully, and we didn't really want to mess with the proposals as has been submitted. Also, any compiling of the proposals would have meant that we go through public comment periods that may take forever. But also, it's a good point, and we try to accommodate this, that people would want to have one thing to look at and know the overall proposal, how it looks like. And that's why we tried to compile everything in the executive summary and also in the ICG report, as Steve mentioned, that was attached to the 3 proposals. Even when we received the public comments, we tried to reflect all the clarification that was needed in the part 0 in the ICG report. Again, not to mess with the original proposals that were received and not to have to go through public comment periods again. So as Lise mentioned also, we were mainly focusing that there is nothing missing, no conflicts, meeting NTIA criteria and community consensus. And finally, regarding how things would move forward in the future, we tried also to get with cooperation. The 3 operational communities have a history of cooperation in the past, and they are cooperating as we speak now, and they have also made a joint statement at the ICANN Public Forum in Dublin, stressing they're willing to cooperate also in the future and during the implementation of the proposal. So I hope this helps to further address the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining remotely. It's great to hear you online. We have a gentleman here, and then we're going to close up for the questions. But just as a warning to the panelists, I'll have a quick, your 1-second takeaway of this experience and how that might be applicable to the broader internet governance discussions here. So, sir, if you introduce yourself.
Hello. Is it right? Yeah. I'm Florian, and I'm from Austria, and I'm one of the newbies who raised their hand, so that's probably a very simple question. And I also tried to get more information about it online, but it's rather hard because it's all very complicated and a lot of abbreviations. What is going to be left of ICANN after this process? Is it still necessary to have ICANN after this process? So that's, I don't want to offend anybody from ICANN, but it's just a question that came up, so please try to answer it. Thank you.
I thought the relevant question is it still necessary to have a Department of Commerce after this? I think the answer is we're continuing to do what we did the day before and the day after, and so very little change from that point of view. But quite seriously, what's being at issue here, at least the core of the transition issue, is what role that the NTIA played with respect to IANA updates. If you're talking about the community empowerment versus what the rest of ICANN does, the bottom-up processes, the supporting organizations, the policy development processes, and so forth, and the support from the staff, I think all of that remains in place, and what's being put together is a kind of an additional layer of communication and involvement and to make sure that all the pieces are working. But it's a really outer shell on top of a already functioning process.
So I'm going to start with Gonzalo, and if everybody just for a minute or so, your observations and how this might apply to the broader internet governance discussions. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, this has been a really good experience. I think we have heard some good questions about questioning actually why we were doing, ICANN was doing what it did in the past. In that regard, Janice was making a crucial question in terms of how the ICANN community was reacting in terms of issues that they think are important for this organization and the process the very own community and staff and the organization put in place to achieve this. As a final remark, because I didn't have the opportunity to respond to one of the comments that Thomas was making, and I think he's quite right. I mean, obviously, I'm not a native speaker in English, and language is a barrier. And no matter how we can improve translation services, which is fine and it's working, and most of the documents are available in different languages, to respond to the gentleman that was raising the question why 40 or 50% of the entire process was conducted by U.S. citizens or European citizens. Thank you very much. So 20% is basically coming from in developing regions or regions out there. Well, language is a clear example and clear answer to your question. I mean, language is just is the starting point to this, but then you have language and then you have content, and to understand what is there, content is the most important thing. It's the next step. So, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I really enjoyed to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. So my take or my lesson from all this process is that the multi-stakeholder model works. The multi-stakeholder is far from perfect, but it works. I think that the most important message to convey in this IGF is that no matter how diverse criteria we might have from our root stakeholder group or our stakeholder origin, when we do identify a common objective and we get out of our silos and we talk to each other and we come to the table with reasonable proposals and compromise, then we as multi-stakeholder community can pretty much achieve anything that we set a goal to. So that would be my take, Teresa.
Well, I am surprised by how little newcomers are in this room. So my takeaway is that we have to continue to do the outreach, and we have to continue to get away that we simplify the complex issues, because I think these are important issues, and somehow we fail to make it easy to understand. And that's one of the major tasks I see we have in front of us. Another one is that I'm very pleased to actually hear from the different communities, and I find it's very important that we work cross communities as much as possible, so we break down the silos as Thomas is talking about. And I agree, we have some silos that need to be broken down. But I also find it's important that we break the barriers between the countries, the genders, the whole lot, so we kind of unite this much outreach between the communities, but also between the different countries, because I know language is a barrier. It's even a barrier for me, not being an English native speaker. You have issues that it takes me just those 2-3 seconds longer to understand than an English-speaking person. And that's a barrier in a lot of discussions. But I don't have the golden bullet to that, but I think it's, as I don't know if it's Thomas or Leon said, ICANN is working on this. I see this progress, and I find that's very important, and it's an important part of the internet governance as such. Thank you.
This is the patience microphone. It takes some time until it's lit, and the more you push, the longer it takes. So I'm getting used to it. Actually, I agree with all that has been said so far. I would just maybe put it together slightly differently. I think it's true, the multi-stakeholder model works. However, it still does not work equally well for everybody for the reasons in particular of accessibility that we talked about. It's not that most processes are actually open per se, but then the barriers are elsewhere. And I think this is still an issue that more work needs to be done. And I'll give you a simple, stupid example that I keep repeating. So far, it hasn't been falling on too fruitful ground, but I have 2 kids, so I know that you have to repeat some things several times, and in the long run, normally things work. For instance, you get several times, you get a document, comments from the CCWG to the CWG. No date, no name, no information, where does this belong to, and so on and so forth. So unless you're an insider, you know that this is the 3rd comment in the 5th public comment period of process XYZ. You have no idea what to do with this. And these are very small, silly things, but it's a question of consciousness, of facilitate access to those who are not the insiders, who maybe first need to look up what is a CWG, what is a CCWG, and if you have a little bit of more awareness in the framing of the formatting of communication, you save hours or probably years worldwide if you collect all the time that is lost through these small things, and you get people in more easily. It's a silly example, but it's actually a daily experience that I'm making, and I won't stop repeating it until it's improved. Thank you very much.
So it looks like I'm the only one up here on the panel who's allegedly a native English speaker, and I have a lot of trouble with the language too. It is interesting to see how many familiar faces there are here. So it's clear that this is an active topic that we'll be engaged in for quite some time. I think we're over time, so I will simply close by saying thank you all.